So welcome back for the third and final installment. Thank you to those of you who have joined now or previously or whatever you like. I'm glad to see you back. And I put the link to the source sheet in the side. It's actually the same as it's been all along. So if your browser remembers, you can type in Akiva and see if it comes up, or you can click on the link. Okay, so today is the third installment. Obviously, not obviously, but I tried to pick out something like sort of a beginning, middle, end kind of structure. Obviously, there's other ways that I could have framed it or done it, or sort of different directions that I could have gone with Rabbi Akiva. So, there's probably a lot of things that I haven't touched at all. But we started with Rabbi Akiva as kind of the person who self-invented in some way, comes from basically nothing, and sort of maintains his openness and curiosity even as he gets more established as a scholar. Last time we saw how Rabbi Akiva's ability to see things differently allows him to bring comfort to people who are suffering or upset by certain situations, because they sort of, that the ability to see something different is related to comfort was basically my thought, right, and how that is related to Rabbi Akiva being the student of Nachum Ish Gamzu, who always says Gamzu Latova, this is also for the good, that Rabbi Akiva sort of is able to see things not only as, it's not really as bad as it seems, but it's actually a good thing. There was one source that we didn't see inside last time that I want to start from, because I think it's going to set the stage for today's discussion, which is about Rabbi Akiva's death. So what I want to do is, Rabbi Akiva's death is sort of, for many of us may know, right, it appears in several pieces of the liturgy that we read, both on Tisha B'Av and on Yom Kippur, as part of what they call like the martyrology. It's funny how you could have a word for that, right? But sort of the list of Asara Hurgei Malchut, right? The 10 people who were killed by the Roman Empire, 10 rabbis. Rabbi Akiva, his end is kind of gruesome and unfortunate. So that's kind of where we are, where we're going. And in some ways, what I want to do today is talk about Rabbi Akiva's attitude towards suffering more broadly. Last time we saw one example, I'll just recap because I don't know if everybody was here or not. We saw one example where Rabbi Akiva sort of helps Rabbi Eliezer, his teacher, reframe the rabbi's own suffering as really it's a good thing because you're reaping the sort of the punishment for any sins you may have done in this world, so that in the next world you'll be fully sort of in the good. So that he sort of deals with suffering there. There's another text about Rabbi Akiva sort of talking about suffering in the abstract that I want to look at. We're going to look at two texts where Rabbi Akiva's death is a little bit foretold or foreshadowed. And then we're going to look at the stories of Rabbi Akiva's sort of eventual punishment themselves. That's the roadmap. So glad to be there with you. So I'm going to share my source sheet. So here we are. The link is in the side. Like I said, it's the same link as last time. So this is the source that sort of, in some ways, is the bridge from last week's discussion of Rabbi Akiva being able to reframe negative experiences as positive. And it actually connects another thing, which is maybe it connects Rabbi Akiva's sort of reading ability as well. Like we talked about his sort of ability to read things very precisely or with a creativity that others don't have. So this comes from a text called the Mechilta de Rabbi Yishmael. The Mechilta is what's called the Midrash Halacha on Sefer Shmot. Every one of the 4 later books of the Bible has a halachic midrash that is associated with it, which is basically, well, they're date from different times, but it's sort of how do the rabbinic laws that you might find in the Mishnah or Gemara come from the verses instead of being organized by topic, like the Mishnah is, it's organized by verse. So, you go through each verse and you read them and say, like, what laws come from here? So here we have, this is near the beginning of the Mechilta de Rabbi Yishmael. There's actually 2 Mechiltas. Mechilta de Rabbi Yishmael is one. The other one is called Mechilta de Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. And they're connected with 2 schools of biblical exegesis. One is the sort of Rabbi Yishmael school, and one is the Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai school, which is really the Rabbi Akiva school. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, as those of us who may have participated in some Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai or Rabbi Akiva related learning yesterday. I know from Lag BaOmer, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is one of Rabbi Akiva's students, he's sort of a main student. So these represent kind of two schools, but it's not like you'll never find Rabbi Akiva in the Mechilta of Rabbi Yishmael. That's just sort of by way of background. So here's the Mechilta. Lo ta'asun iti, right? And then in parentheses, we have the rest of the verse. Thou shalt not make iti with me, right? Right? You shall not, what shall you not make? You shall not make any gods of silver, nor shall you make for yourself any gods of gold. Right? So there's sort of an interesting parallelism in this verse, right? Lo tasun iti Elohei chasef, ve'Elohei zahav lo tasu lachem, right? Don't make with me any gods of silver, and gods of gold don't make for you. So it's a nice parallel structure, but when you find a word like this in the Chumash, you're always gonna, especially if you're a rabbi, you're gonna want to ask, well, why in one place does it say et, and why in one place does it say lachem, right? What does et even mean here? And as we saw, Rabbi Akiva has a lot to say about the word et in general. So, okay, Rabbi Yishmael Omer, lo ta'asun demut shimshi, shamashai hamishamshim lefanai b'marom, right? You shouldn't make, not only should you not make any goal, like in general sort of idols that you imagine, but you shouldn't make images of the things that are with me, God, meaning God is sort of up there in heaven in this image with the heavenly bodies, but you shouldn't make images of those things, even, it sounds like, even if you know that they're not really God, they're kind of serving God, are subsidiary to God, right? And also not lo demut avanim, lo demut kruvim, not any or malachim, no angels, and none of the heavenly bodies. So meaning et means neither God nor the things that surround God. Okay. Rabbi Natan says lo tasun oti, right? Don't make me. Ose ani, right? Lo shelo tamar ose ani lo kanin. So Rabbi Natan says, look, we shouldn't read lo tasun iti with me. You should read lo tasun oti. Don't make me. You shouldn't say ani lo selo kamin demut v'shachavela. I'm going to make something that looks like God. This is probably the pshat, right? Well, it's not clear. The pshat might be don't have idols that are not God. We're saying don't even make statues of things that you recognize are subservient to God, or don't make statues of what you recognize is God, right? Lo tasun oti. And then furthermore, and then he quotes another pasuk. Here we have Rabbi Akiva, so I'm going to underline. Right, so we have two interpretations that are pretty close to whatever the meaning of the text is. Like, whatever the meaning of the text is, it sounds like it's about not making physical objects, right? Don't make idols of some sort, right? What exactly thing you would be tempted to make that it's telling you not to make, there's a disagreement. But here comes Rabbi Akiva. He says, Lo tasuniti, shelo tinhadgu bi chederach she'acharim manhigim b'yirotehem, right? It's not about what physical objects you're making. It's about how you treat God in a more abstract way. Don't treat me the way that other people treat their deities, right? And what way is that? Right? When things are going well, they honor their God. They're like, thank God, this is great. I feel so blessed, right? Right? Like people will sort of, it quotes a verse about people sort of sacrificing to their idols in times of good, right? But when negative things happen to them, suffering or punishment, and then they're like, oh, what good are you, right? Okay. So basically, right, Rabbi Akiva is presenting not like things that you might want to make out of physical objects, but like ways that you might treat God and what the pasuk is demanding of you. So he's saying, don't treat me the way people treat idols, which is when good things happen, they attribute it to their God, but when bad things happen, they sort of curse their God. Maybe they also attribute it to their God, but they curse their God for maybe not protecting them, right? About atem, but you, right? Right? If I bring something good on you, then sure, give thanks or recognition, right? It's interesting, we switch from pur anut, sort of negativity or punishment, to yisurin, suffering, right? But yisurin can also mean sort of suffering for a purpose, often in these things, right? So if I bring suffering onto you, to nuhoda. Don't react negatively when you suffer or are punished, right? You should also give thanks for suffering. And then he gives a quote from Tehillim, and David says, Kol shisuot asa v'shem Hashem akra, right? So David says, right, I will lift a cup of salvation and call out in the name of God. And the continuation of the same pasuk, or the next pasuk, Torah v'yagod himself b'shem Hashem ekra. Right? This is from Hallel, right? Torah v'yagod himself, right? Just as when I sort of am lifting a cup of salvation, you can't see my hand, right? Which is a good thing. I would thank God, right? I will call on the name of God. So too, if I find sort of Torah v'yagod, suffering and unhappiness, right? I will also call out to God. He brings a quote from Eov, and then he sort of, I'm going to skip a little bit. Yeah, it says, Ma'aser. Anshe Dor HaMabul, right? The people of he gives it a sort of account of the generation of the flood who had ugly deeds. This is not in the English, I'm sorry. They behaved badly when things were good for them. Then when bad things came for them, they had to sort of accept against their will, right? Which is sort of it's a little bit of a veiled threat, meaning like, and it's sort of saying, right, it's hard, both of the things I'm asking you to do, because Rabbi Akiva, are hard, right? One is to recognize God when things are going badly, which seems like is not human nature, and that's what the pasuk is speaking against. But the other is it's not always so easy to recognize God when things are going well either. And here's how he is. Ba'anu shehayinu na'im b'tova. Right? He's trying to make a kavachol, right? These generations that were punished, these sort of biblical groups that were punished, they sort of didn't behave well when it comes to when their life was good, but then somehow the way he reads it, they were sort of forced to recognize God and when they were punished. So too we, since we behave well when things are good, all the more so that we should recognize God when we're punished. I'm not sure how the all the more so works, right? But that's what he's saying, right? Okay. Finally, okay. This is where the English picks up again. Adam sameach b'yisurim, right? Furthermore, not only should we be accepting of negativity and see it as sort of something positive from God, not negativity, but sort of punishment or suffering. Adam sameach b'yisurim yoter mehatova. You should actually sort of be happier about suffering than about good things. Even if you sort of have a great life for your whole life, right? That doesn't mean that you've been forgiven for your sins that you have done, right? As we saw in the story of Rabbi Eliezer, for those who were here, right? Rabbi Eliezer is sort of like, you're telling me I'm being punished in this world for my sins, but I've never sinned. And Rabbi Akiva says, everybody sins, right? So if your life is really good, then the sins that we know that you've done are sort of have never been accounted for. Right? Right? What can forgive your sin? Having a good life cannot sort of expunge your sins, but suffering can, right? So I would say a few things. First of all, like, I totally accept if people are disturbed by this theology, right? Like, that's fine. Basically, right, Rabbi Akiva is saying, right, what God is saying, the first part I think is very, I personally find it relatively easy to accept, which is, right, first of all, I think it's an interesting and creative way to understand this pasuk. This pasuk is not about what physical object can you make, something that you think looks like X, Y, or Z, even though that's what it sounds like, but in some ways what Rabbi Akiva is saying is more relevant, at least to us, in a world without idols, literal idols of, metal and wood and whatever, is don't treat me in the way that idolaters treat their gods, meaning basically as kind of like a good luck charm, and when things go well, you're like, yay, thanks, good luck charm, and when things don't go well, you're like, boo, you're a bad good luck charm, right? That like it's something else, right? Then he goes on to try and explain, what is it, right? Why should you be recognizing God for both the good and the bad? And this is sort of what we saw him do last time. It's not just that the bad is not really so bad. For example, in the story with the rooster, for those who were here, right? Sort of a classic just so story, right? You thought this thing wasn't going to turn out well, but it turned out that it's better that all these bad things happened to me because then I didn't get kidnapped, right? So it's not just that this bad wasn't so bad, but that what's bad is actually good, right? That like suffering helps sort of expunge your sin. Okay, so that's sort of where he ends up, is that you should not sort of just discount God as soon as the going gets tough, but furthermore, that you should actually appreciate the suffering that you experience. Again, right, like one thing to sort of think about in all these stories is when Rabbi Akiva is saying these things, is he saying them before or after his experience tries to confirm them, right? We're going to see that Rabbi Akiva himself suffers a lot. So is he saying this as sort of a way to understand his own suffering? Or is he saying it, and his saying it is what allows him to later process his own suffering, the fact that he knows this? I'm not going to answer that question, but that's something to think about. I think there's sort of a dynamic relationship where Rabbi Akiva, his ability to sort of perform under pressure in certain ways or unexpectedly comes from the fact that he's able to see things in these strange ways. He's able to look at negativity and say, actually, this is something that I should be grateful to God for. Okay, so that's the background and the kind of the bridge from last time, where Rabbi Akiva, his ability to look at things from a different perspective goes so far as to say, you shouldn't, not only should you not discount God when you suffer, but actually you should be thankful, right? It's actually good for you. Okay. So here's the first of two places where Rabbi Akiva's death is sort of foretold or foreseen. Often, right, what's interesting about these texts, I think, is that as the rabbis are telling stories of Rabbi Akiva, they themselves are aware of sort of the tragic end, and they're writing it into the story itself. Like, it's always sort of the shadow, like this elephant in the room of like, that's really great, but what's going to happen to him later? So this story has many, many angles. It's often told from a perspective of the nature of Torah Sheba'al Peh and Torah Shebechtav, which we'll touch on, but we'll see. Okay. Rabbi Yehuda said, Rabbi Yehuda, sorry. B'sha'at she'alam Moshe le'Marom, v'tza'ol HaKadosh Baruch Hu, she'yoshev v'kosher kitarim le'otiyot. Right? When Moshe went up to heaven, he found God sitting and tying crowns, or sort of decorating little crowns on the letters, meaning for those of us who've seen a Sefer Torah, you've seen the inside of the Sefer Torah, right? These little things, right? These little like chupchiks, right, is what it means by the crowns. They don't change the meaning from our perspective in any way. So he sees God, like the Torah is ready. This is the image, right? Like you show up for your delivery order, your Moshe, you go up to heaven for your delivery. They tell you it's going to be ready in 30 minutes, and you show up in 35 minutes, and they're like, just one more thing. And Moshe says, right, Mi ma'akev al yadech, right? Amar lefanav, he says before God, Mi ma'akev al yadech, all right, who's stopping you, right? Amar lo, meaning it seems almost like this is a generic way of saying, like, what's the delay about? He doesn't necessarily expect the answer to be an actual person, right? He doesn't expect the answer to be an actual person, but it turns out the answer actually is a person, right? Moshe sees God just kind of like doodling away on the top of the letters, and is like, what are you doing? And God says, oh, there's this guy, Amarlo, Adam echad yesh, she'atid liot b'sof kama dora. There's going to be this guy after several generations, but Akiva ben Yosef Shmo, and his name is Akiva ben Yosef. And what's so special about him? She'atid lidrosh al kol kos v'kos tilim shel halachot. On every little, like, kos is like a thorn, but it's referred, like kosel shel yud is kind of like the little pointy part of a yud, meaning like the tiniest part of a letter. He's going to lidrosh, sort of to derive by exegesis, mounds and mounds of halachot. Right, it's sort of like on every jot and tittle would be like coast to coast. It's sort of our parallel expression, right? So it's true. Instead of, for example, what you might expect God to say, right? So it turns out, right, God is not just doodling. These little tags or tagi, like little crowns, they carry meaning, right? Once we know that, like, God is about to give the Torah and he's putting on things that carry meaning into the Torah, you might expect him to then, when Moshe's like, what are you doing? God's like, oh, actually, let me explain to you how this works, right? This is part of the meaning of the Torah. But he doesn't say that. He says there's another guy who's going to be able to derive meaning from these things, right? So already there's something like, this is why people often talk about this, we'll see even more so, what this story has to do with the nature of Torah Shebechtav and Torah Sheba'al Peh, right? Is the Torah what we consider the Torah Shebechtav, the drashot of the rabbis, is it sort of, was it dictated at a Har Sinai or not, right? It sounds like maybe not, because here you have Moshe who, instead of God being like, oh, let me tell you what these things mean, says somebody else is going to derive their meaning later, okay? There may be other ways to read the story, but that's what it sounds. So, Amar lefanav, right? So Moshe gets the message, right, that God is saying, this is for somebody else, not for you, right? Most of the main part of the Torah, the written Torah, is for you, but actually there's somebody else who's going to get something more out of it than you can. And Moshe says, right? Show him to me. So he said, turn around. This becomes like sort of a literary motif in the story, right? Turn around. And then, right, it's like, I feel like those of us who have like movies, as part of our life, meaning all modern people, sort of can see this in a different way than maybe the original writing. But it's sort of like, I feel like it's like you turn around, and as you turn around, it's like do, and then like all of a sudden you're in a different place, right? You turn around, you're in a different room. So he goes to this at the end of 8 rows. In the olden days, the Beit Midrash was kind of hierarchical. The more of an advanced student you are, the further towards the front you sit. So Moshe's kind of like sitting in the very back, the back row of the base, if you will. And he has no idea what is going on. So he says, God, show him to me. He gets dropped in the back row of Rabbi Akiva's classroom, and he has no idea what's going on, right? And he feels weak. Why does he feel weak? Right? What makes him feel weak? Maybe what he's about to, I think there's a version of the story where it says, later on in the story, he's about to say, right, like, if you have somebody like that who's like such an intellectual powerhouse, why are you giving the Torah for me, right? It seems like he feels weak from a personal sort of, I don't want to say ego, but like self-esteem perspective, where he's sort of like, wow, I can't hold a candle to this guy. Okay, so he goes in, he doesn't understand what's going on. He feels weak, or he feels kind of bad about it, right? He feels like, who am I compared to this Rabbi Akiva fellow? But then, right, as he's listening, Rabbi Akiva gets up to a certain point in the lesson. So students said, hey, Rabbi, how do you know that? So he said, oh, that's a halacha l'Moshe Sinai, right? That's a law that comes to Moshe from Sinai. In the Gemara, usually what this means is, right, it's something that we don't have a derivation from. I can't tell you what pasuk this is from. We just know it. It's a tradition sort of that we don't know how to attach to the text. Okay? So Moshe has sort of just like gone up to heaven. Before he even gets the Torah, God is like, oh, just give me a second. I'm doing something for this guy, Rabbi Akiva. Moshe says, show me Rabbi Akiva. He goes to Rabbi Akiva and finds out that Rabbi Akiva knows all this stuff that Moshe does not understand at all. But then Rabbi Akiva says, oh, what I'm teaching, at least this one thing I'm teaching is halacha l'Moshe Sinai. And then Niteshva dato, Moshe feels better, right? I would say there's 2 main ways of reading this story up until this point, right? In the circles that I frequent, and many of us may have heard this story intending to sort of say, okay, look, right, where Moshe is saying, look, where the point of the story is, right, something can still be considered part of Torah Sinai or halacha l'Moshe Sinai, even if Moshe himself didn't know it, that Moshe kind of gets a system that then, different generations will derive different things from. The Rambam kind of presents it this way, right, there's certain rules that you can use to read the Torah, but then every generation actually uses those rules, and they don't necessarily come up with things that were known by all previous generations. But in any case, so halacha l'Moshe Sinai, right? That's one reading. Is sort of the point of this story is that you can call the Torah given to Moshe at Sinai, even though not every single detail that's said in every contemporary Beit Midrash was said to Moshe, right? There are other Gemaras that say every single thing that anybody will ever say in a Beit Midrash was given to Moshe. This story is sort of like, seems to be the opposition to that. No, not everything was said to Moshe, because if it was, Moshe would have known what was going on. That's one possibility, right? Another possibility, sort of like the simple, I think it's sort of, it kind of like, it's almost like, it feels like too simple. It feels like you told this whole story for that purpose. The point is like, well, Moshe felt better because he was like, oh, the reason I don't know what's going on is because God hasn't given me the Torah yet. But as soon as God gives me the Torah, I'm going to know what's going on, right? So that's sort of like the less sort of, I would say, like theologically interesting reading of the story, but I think it's a real reading. But either way, right? So one possibility is sort of like Moshe is feeling, right? But my mother, thank you, points out that, right, halacha l'Moshe Sinai doesn't come from rules, but right, and that's why, right, Moshe. I think in that reading you would have to say Moshe, right, has not yet and will not get all of the details that Rabbi Akiva is saying, but he feels better when he hears them explicitly acknowledge that what they're doing derives from his tradition. In one case, it's because they call it halacha Moshe Sinai, but more generally, it means that they're not actually like on a different planet. They're doing the continuation of what he started out. Maybe. I'm actually not here, although, right, the question of creative readings and whether Rabbi Akiva can do something that no one before him has done has come up before and is an interesting one. That's not totally why we're here. We're here for what comes next. So Moshe comes back. Chazar, uval lifnei Kadosh Baruch Hu, right? He comes back. He's sort of like the little wishy-washy things go over the screen again. He comes back and he comes before God again. And he says, Amar lefanav ribono shel olam, yesh lecha adam kazeh v'ata noten Torah al yadai, right? You have somebody like that and you're giving the Torah through me? Meaning, why don't you wait around for Akiva ben Yosef to come and he'll give the Torah to Bnei Israel? Amar lo, shtok, he said, be quiet. Kach alav b'machshava lefanai. This is sort of how I decided to do it. So not yours is not to reason why. So this is a little preview, right? This answer, some people might think of it as a little bit like harsh, right? Like, okay, was it really such a bad question to ask, like, why did you give the Torah to me? But it's a preview of what's about to happen, which is Amar lefanav ribono shel olam haritani torato hareini scharo, right? You showed me his Torah, well now show me his reward, right? Meaning this guy is so awesome, right? I remember now Moshe thinks that he's going to be like the leader at this point in time. Probably Moshe thinks he's going to be the leader who leads the Jews into Israel, and he's going to sort of like have this awesome life, and for all of his work, God's really going to reward him, right? So he thinks like, you have this amazing guy, Rabbi Akiva. What's his reward going to be? So he says again, go back, right? Look around, but this time he's not in Rabbi Akiva's classroom. He's somewhere else. Chazar la'achorav, and this is content warning a little bit, where he sees that they're sort of weighing Rabbi Akiva's flesh in the butcher shop. Right? Amar lefanav, and he says to him, Ribono shel olam, right? Master of the universe. Zu Torah v'zu schara. This is the phrase that we'll see again, right? This is Torah and this is its reward. I believe this appears in one of the liturgical poems on this as well, right? Sort of, you showed me how awesome he is, and then you showed me this like horrible, gruesome end. And this is where God says, Shtok, kach alav machshava lefanai, right? Like, be quiet. This is what I decided to do. Okay? So this story, first of all, it's a premonition of Rabbi Akiva's death, right? Even as in the Gemara, we're talking about Rabbi Akiva's amazing scholarship, we're always aware that his end is going to be unfortunate and gruesome, right? And it's also sort of actually connecting that to his sort of amazingness, right? It's putting them together somehow. They go together. They're in the same story, and God says the same about both of them, right? Meaning the exchange is verbally similar between the two, right? When we're talking about how great Rabbi Akiva is, or at least like, is he not greater than me? And we're talking about how horrible his end is. They sort of go together. So that's sort of, I don't know what to say about it. I think that there's a lot to say about this Gemara, right? People quote this Gemara for two reasons, right? One is to talk about the question of what is the nature of the Torah Shebestav and the Torah Shebal Peh, and what exactly it is was given at Sinai and all of that kind of question. The other is to talk about these questions of suffering and, understanding why bad things happen to good people. Because this is a Gemara that basically says, like, don't, right? Moshe's like, I want to understand why bad things happen to good people. And God's like, don't. I saw there was a comment previously about connecting this to V'ra'ita et Achorai, right there. In a different exploration, you can look at how this exchange fits into a general pattern of saying that what Moshe was asking God for when he says, show me your ways, is in Sefer Shemot, is help me understand the problem of suffering or evil. And God, what kind of answer he gets is sort of very obscure, but at the very least, the answer that he gets is, you can't see my face, meaning I can't give you a direct answer. You can't fully understand that. And in some ways, right, when he says be silent here, it's a similar, maybe, kind of answer, which is that's not something that you can understand, right? Either you could read it as sort of like, that's outside your lane, it's wrong for you to ask that, meaning, yeah, I could answer it, but I don't want to. But I think that in some ways, at least a more meaningful, if not better reading of this Gemara is, right, it's not just that it's something that you don't have a right to ask, but you can't, there is no answer, right, for you. There's a whole Torah of Rabbi Nachman about this, also about the nature of silence and how, right, there being an answer or not an answer is different than there being an answer that you can verbalize, right, and what, that this isn't sort of like a rebuke, but it's not like a shut up silent, but it's a be silent sort of like the only way you have any hope of sort of accessing meaning in suffering is by something that is not a verbal interaction with it. That's an aside. It's an aside, but it's not. It's very important. So here we have Rabbi Akiva as sort of this person who's generating new Torah in some way, and also a person who suffers, right? And who's suffering, just like his Torah is something that Moshe doesn't understand, his suffering is something that Moshe doesn't understand. And it kind of opens the possibility, right, that Rabbi Akiva himself, who has the power to understand more about Torah, maybe also has the power to understand more about suffering. We've seen him try to make meaning out of suffering. Let's see where it goes. I want to share the last, one more source. Maybe I should have put this before. This is, I cannot get away from this story, as some people might have noticed. I quoted it last time also. There's a story of Rabbi Eliezer's death, and some people know Rabbi Eliezer is excommunicated by the rabbis. And there is actually, well, I'll do a brief recap of the Avnei story. Rabbi Eliezer ends up having this big dispute with the rabbis. He's sort of like, it's kind of, I've been watching Star Wars with my kids, so it's kind of like this big force battle, right? Like, he's like moving stuff and everything's going crazy in the world. He makes things move, he makes things go backwards, he makes the wall fall down almost, he makes his voice come from heaven, and the rabbis are like, no, you're wrong. They end up excommunicating him, Rabbi Eliezer, and then somebody has to go tell him, right? And they choose Rabbi Akiva to go tell him because, right, it seems like they're very aware of Rabbi Akiva's sort of exceptional interpersonal capacity to help people see bad situations in a new light. In any case, so that story is written, Rabbi Akiva goes to go tell him, and then various sort of destructions and tragedies ensue. At the end of Rabbi Eliezer's life, right, remember he's been separating from the sages for a long time, he's going to die, he's getting very sick, and the sages come to visit him, there's a whole introduction, and sort of like, should they go in, should they not go in, is he really of sound mind? They finally enter sort of his sick room, which turns out to be his deathbed room. Rabbi Eliezer said to them, why have you come, right? So this is what I'm picking up in source 3, right? Lama batem, why have you come? Amrulo, lo Torah banu. They said we came to learn Torah. And he said, that's nice. Amar lahem ba'ad achshav lama lo batem. If you want to learn my Torah, where have you been when I was actually alive for the last however many years, right? Amrulo lo hayal anu t'nai. And this is where, like, this is sort of often a difficult conversation has a moment where you can sort of face the difficulties and sort of deal with it, understand it and appreciate it and kind of like, tackle it head on, I guess you would say, or you can veer away and not tackle it. And this is that moment for them, at least. They're like, where have you been until now? The real answer to where have you been until now is you were excommunicated and we made a choice to follow the rabbis and not you, right? But they don't say that. They're like, oh, we didn't have time, which is like not true, right? They're saying something, they're trying to kind of paper over the huge elephant in the room, which is like, you're our teacher, but you were excommunicated and we sort of separated from you. So Rabbi Eliezer is not having any of that. He is a very blunt person in many stories. And he says to them, tamea ani im yamutu mitadas man. I would be surprised if these sages die their own death. Meaning, like, you guys are all gonna, like, bad things are gonna happen to you. Meaning, you're not gonna talk about how you abandoned me because I was excommunicated, but I'll talk about it. I still think you guys made a huge mistake and God is gonna punish you for it. Okay, which is like not what they came to hear, right? They didn't come to hear him continue to excoriate them, but he doesn't care. Like, that's fine, that's what he wants to say. Okay, Rabbi Akiva said, what about Shali Mahu? Which is an interesting question, right? Is he saying, what about me, like, I want more details? Or is he saying, like, even me, right? Like, I get these guys, but like you and I were so close and I learned so much from you. What about me? And Rabbi Eliezer says, Shalcha kashet mishalahan. Yours is actually going to be worse than theirs. Right? In Sefaria, they say, as you were my primary student and you did not come to study. Fine, maybe that's why. But, right, like Rabbi Eliezer is sort of predicting this negative outcome. I don't know if he's predicting, he might be predicting and also kind of creating in some way. There's an English word that I'm missing. Right, sort of like his words may have the power to sort of make it come about, cursing almost, right? Where Rabbi Eliezer is saying like, I don't forgive you guys for what you did to me, and Rabbi Akiva, you worst of all, right? Even though in the previous story, Rabbi Akiva is the one who's chosen to sort of go deliver the difficult news because he's the most sensitive and whatever, Rabbi Eliezer sort of never forgives him for not getting as much Torah as he can from Rabbi Eliezer. So here, right, instead of in the previous source where we start to ask questions like maybe Rabbi Akiva's new way of understanding the Torah more than Moshe can lead us to a new way of understanding suffering differently, what Moshe couldn't understand. Here's kind of the opposite. Like this is sort of a classic, right? You suffer because you sinned, and here Rabbi Akiva, your sin is mistreating Rabbi Eliezer, and you're going to suffer for it. And that's kind of, it raises a lot of other questions about sort of the symbolic nature of the concept of Rabbi Eliezer, right? Rabbi Eliezer in many ways reflects a type of Torah learning that is the opposite of Rabbi Akiva's. It's not creative. He doesn't generate new things. His whole thing is that everything he says has to have come from one of his rabbis. And maybe it's sort of like we extol Rabbi Akiva so much for his creativity, but there's a loss that comes with that as well. So we have two places where Rabbi Akiva's death is kind of foreshadowed, right? And in one, sort of, we have Moshe as the interlocutor feeling bad about it. In this one, we have Rabbi Eliezer sort of justifying it in some way. Okay, so we'll move to a text in Eruvin. So this comes up in a larger context. So here we have the Sefaria introduction, right, concerning the significance of observing the words of the sages, the Gemara relates. Right, so that was sort of our topic in the Gemara overall, and here we're going to start with the Breita Tanu Rabbanan. Ma'aseh Rabbi Akiva, right? A story happened with Rabbi Akiva, who was imprisoned. Now, I don't know if this is exactly like he's imprisoned before he's about to get killed. For anybody who's read As a Driven Leaf, who remembers it, which is like a Milton Steinberg adaptation of the life of Elisha ben Avuya, but the story of Rabbi Akiva being imprisoned and killed appears in that. Rabbi Akiva sort of presented as like his mentor and then whatever. So perhaps because of that historically fictional-ish novel, I tend to read this midrash as having taken place at the time where he's imprisoned and about to be executed. I don't know if that has to be that way, but here's sort of, it's certainly a time where he's being punished by the Roman government for something, okay? So he was imprisoned. V'haya Rabbi Yehoshua Hagarsi, right, this guy named Rabbi Yeshua Hagarsi, who's probably not like the Rabbi Yeshua, his teacher, but maybe one of his students, would come to prison. Misharto b'chol yom. He was sort of serving him every day. Attending to him is a good word. Okay. Misharto, he was serving him. B'chol yom b'yom hayu machnisin lo mayim b'midah. Right, every day they would bring him sort of some measured amount of water. Yom Echad, Mitzao Shomer Beit HaAsurin, right? One day, the prison guard finds Rabbi Yeshua Hagarsi and sees him carrying this amount of water. Amar lo, Hayom Meimecha Merubin. He said, you have too much water today. Shemalach Tor Beit HaAsurin et HaSarich. Maybe you're going to try and sort of like use it to soften the dirt so that you can like dig a tunnel under the wall or undermine the prison or something like that. So he poured half of it out and gave the other half to Rabbi Yeshua. Hagarsi is going to bring it to Rabbi Akiva. So first of all, right, like there's something like this every day is working well until one day it's not. And then he takes away half of it. It feels kind of arbitrary, and it feels like, right, you don't know if he actually thought that this is a security risk, or that's a pretense, right? And you're supposed to sort of like feel powerless in the face of that pretense. Kishaba Esa Rabbi Akiva. So when he comes to Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Yeshua Hagarsi comes, Amar lo, Yeshua, he's like, Rabbi Akiva sort of sees how little water he brought today, and he says, don't you know that I'm old and my life depends on what you bring me? Meaning, if not for you, I would already be dead, basically, right? So so he tells him the whole, it's almost like a little accusatory. We don't necessarily expect that from Rabbi Akiva, but he's an extremist, so we can kind of forgive. So Rabbi Yeshua Hagarsi tells him the whole situation. Amarlo, so he says, okay, great, well, give me some of the water so I can wash my hands. Meaning, because like maybe he's also bringing him food. Amarlo, Lishtot ein megi'in, litol yadecha megi'in. There's not enough water here, even for you to drink for a whole day. How can you use some of it to wash your hands? Amar lo, ma'aseh, right? What can I do? Shechayavin alehem mita, right? Actually, not washing your hands properly makes you liable to death. Pretty intense. Mutat amut mitat asmi, right? I'd rather die a natural death, v'lo a'avor al dat chavirai, rather than sort of go against the opinion of my colleagues, meaning washing hands is a rabbinic requirement. Okay? So part of the subtext of Rabbi Yeshua's question here is like, listen, like, you got to stay alive, man, right? Washing hands, it's not just that it's not a priority because the alternative is like keeping yourself alive, but it's like, of all the mitzvot, it's especially not a priority because it's rabbinic. And Rabbi Akiva says, no, like, actually, right, the fact that something is rabbinic is no reason for me to take it less seriously. Like, for, you know, this is also like a whole larger conversation of like, what does it mean to say something is rabbinic if there's a biblical obligation to also, like, follow the rabbis. But okay, right, so the fact that something is rabbinic is not even a reason to treat it more leniently. But it's very interesting the way that Rabbi Akiva talks about it. He calls it da'at chaverai, right, the opinion of my colleagues. And it seems like for all we saw about Rabbi Yeshua, for all that we saw about Rabbi Eliezer, kind of, not Rabbi Eliezer, third try, for all we saw about Rabbi Akiva having explanations that his teachers don't understand, and right, he sort of has questions and a whole different approach, right? He's doing something that nobody has done, right? The story of Nachon, where he's saying these things in the same midrash. It sounds like, right, he's the first person to say a lot of those things. For all of that, when it comes to practice, right, he's very much collegial. He very much is part of the group. He's not a Rabbi Eliezer who's sort of like, I'm going to destroy your building using my supernatural powers if you don't agree with me. He goes along to get along in some ways, right? If they don't understand him and they vote against him, okay. And that's sort of like an interesting subtext to the whole Rabbi Akiva discussion and like the valorization of Rabbi Akiva in the Gemara, which is, in practice, does his whole new way actually revolutionize studying Torah so that everyone agrees with him instead of the people who came before? No, not necessarily. But somehow it's still considered very valuable. So when he frames it this way, it's sort of like, I'm part, even though I haven't like totally, you know, become assimilated and just do whatever my rabbi teachers tell me, I still fundamentally see myself as part of this group in a collegial way that I can't sort of betray. And they say, Amru lo ta'am klum, so he didn't eat anything until he gave him water to wash his hands. It's interesting why, like, he needs to, he seems, I don't know, like this physical thing you're supposed to imagine here, a situation where he needs Rabbi Yoshua Garthi to give him water for washing. Maybe Rabbi Yoshua Garthi is kind of like passing things through a little floor or something, and he's thinking like, eat first and then I'll give you water to wash it down. And he says, no, I need to wash. So he wouldn't eat anything until he gave him water and he washed his hands. Right? And then the rabbis heard about it. Right? If when he's old, he's like this, he's so meticulous, the way they translate it, or he's so collegial. When he was younger, how much more so he would have been. What if he's like this when he's imprisoned? He must have been, or he was so much more when he was not imprisoned. Okay, so this is sort of one of the indications that what we're doing is not necessarily like a history of, Rabbi Akiva, because as we saw in a previous class, there are other texts that suggest that actually, like in his youth, Rabbi Akiva was not like such a hotshot in terms of like the rabbinic community. He was actually like an anti-rabbi Amharis. So, right, like what does this mean when they say that? Or maybe this is being said by a younger rabbi who doesn't even know his backstory. You could try and harmonize them that way. But basically, they're sort of seeing this as like, the point of this is even under these extreme circumstances, Rabbi Akiva is so meticulous and so careful to follow even the rules of the rabbis. Like, it's considered like a praise of him. What does that do? It doesn't really connect to our previous topics immediately, but it does connect to sort of the question of Rabbi Akiva's inner fortitude, right? He's a person who does what he believes even under very challenging circumstances, right? It would have been very easy to sort of like construct a hand-wavy argument. Honestly, from the perspective of contemporary halacha, it's easy to construct a real argument, right? If you were to ask a rabbi, I'm in prison and I only have enough water either to wash my hands or to drink, they would be like, well, drink, duh, right? So like, it's not obvious that what Rabbi Akiva is doing is even required by halacha, but it shows you that his sort of single-minded focus in some ways on maintaining his values rather than being sure that he's the person who decides what he does and doesn't value or care about, not sort of letting himself be like just buffeted by his circumstances, which gets back to his very beginning story where he has this moment where he's like, I don't have to be a shepherd just because I'm a shepherd when I'm 40, doesn't mean I have to be one for my whole life. Okay, fine. Rabbi Yehuda, we're going to skip this section. Okay, here, this is sort of the end. This is the story of Rabbi Akiva's death in Masechet Brachot. I guess this will bring us to the end. Not like the best. Sorry to end on a downer. What can you do? I think in some ways, right, that's like the stories that foreshadow Rabbi Akiva's death are aware of this feeling of like, we have this whole mythology of Rabbi Akiva and it ends on a downer. I'm like, what are we going to do about that? So our sages taught to the Rabbanan in a Braita. The rabbis said that the Jews may not study or teach Torah. Papas ben Yehuda, right? And this guy named Papas ben Yehuda shows up. Rabbi Akiva, despite this decree, is still teaching Torah. And not only is he teaching Torah, he's doing it completely publicly with no regard for whatever the rules are. Okay? Amarlo, Akiva, he says, aren't you afraid of the empire? Right? More Star Wars references. Okay. Amarlo, Mashal. So Rabbi Akiva doesn't say yes or no. He says, I'll give you a parable. Okay? What's it like? L'shu'al, like a fox. Also, right, foxes, we have met Rabbi Akiva and a fox previously when he saw a fox leaving the Kodesh Kodashim and said that, what did he say? He said everybody was sort of sad that it's a sign of the desolation of the place of the temple. And he says, no, this is good because it's fulfilling a prophecy. And if the negative prophecy is fulfilled, then the positive prophecy will be fulfilled. So it's sort of like cute that he chooses the fox here. There is a whole genre of like fox-based parables. People write about them as like a cross-cultural phenomenon, meaning it's not unique to the Gemara. People write about how it does or doesn't connect to other ancient fox-based parables, but fine. So he has this fox-based parable. It goes like this. The fox is walking by the river. And he sees the fish that are gathering from place to place. These little schools of fish, like if you ever see in a river, right, they're kind of like, and then they like turn around, they kind of go as a group. Okay? Interestingly, right, you can see that the metaphor is being crafted, not the metaphor, the analog is being crafted to match what Rabbi Akiva has done, which is gather groups and learn Torah publicly, right? Like the salient feature of fish in the water that's going to come out from here is not necessarily that they're groups, but okay, so he sees little schools of fish and they keep on darting about from place to place. So Amar Lahem, so the fox says, why are you running away? Well, we have to keep moving because of the nets that people cast on us, right? Meaning, Rabbi Akiva, it sounds like, right, if we want to sort of take these details back to the Rabbi Akiva story, it sounds like, yes, he's gathering groups, but he's not necessarily doing it the way he always did. Maybe they're in different places every day, or they're taking some precautions, but he's not willing to sort of disband as a precaution. So the fox says, why are you sort of fleeing? And they say, we're fleeing the people who are trying to catch us and eat us. So the fox is like, oh, well, I have a solution. No fishing nets on the land. Why don't you come join me here? And let us all live together as one big happy family. I don't know what this is like in the sort of the mashal itself, like the fox parable. I don't know what it means to say that the fox ancestors and the fish ancestors live together, but when we bring it back to the Bnei Israel parable, it seems like Rabbi Akiva is saying, like, I reject the idea of some sort of forced assimilation, that there's like, the Romans are behaving with the heavy hand, but behind it maybe is some vision like where we all just get along as long as everybody is Roman, right? And he's saying, I reject that. Okay. So Amrilo, right? Are you like the person who people say is the wisest of the animals? Right? You are not smart. You are dumb, right? If we're afraid in the place where we sort of are supposed to live, right, that gives us vitality, right, the water, right? If in the water we have to worry about people trying to kill us, then you're going to take us to the place where we anyways die, right? So we're not going to have our natural life force. Plus, who knows who's going to try and kill us there? All the more so. By the way, who's going to try and kill them there? Probably the fox, right? So, right, they're sort of saying, that's a terrible idea, Mr. Fox. Now, Mr. Fox probably intended it to be a terrible idea and was trying to trick them, but okay. Right, the nimshal for Rabbi Akiva is, right, we're like the fish, the Torah is like the water, and we can't leave the Torah in order to save our lives, because that's actually going to be like, we're even less likely to survive without the Torah than we are with it. Like being with the Torah has its own risks, but they're better than the risks of abandoning it. Right? Right? So us, right? When we sit and we're dealing with Torah, in which it is written, right? That the Torah is your life. It would be even worse if we abandoned it. Also, interestingly, right, like this brings us back to the water metaphors that we saw in the very first class, but you can analyze that on your own. They're later in the same document. Amru, and they said, Lo hayu yamim lotim ad shetispasuhu l'Rabbi Akiva v'chafshu b'beit hasurim. Right? It was not long after that they caught Rabbi Akiva and they put him in prison. Right? V'tafsu l'papus ben Yehuda v'chafshu etzlo. And the same guy who asked him the question also gets arrested. Okay? So Rabbi Akiva is in prison with his sort of interlocutor from previously, the person who challenged him and said, right, like, Rabbi Akiva, don't you think it would be safer not to teach Torah right now? So Amarlo, Papos, Mihavian Chalchan, right? He says, hey, what are you doing here? Amarlo, Ashrecha Rabbi Akiva. So, first of all, you have this sort of moment of poetic justice where the person who challenged Rabbi Akiva now is going to sort of explicitly acknowledge the rightness of Rabbi Akiva's ways. He says, Rabbi Akiva, you're so lucky, Shnei Pasta al Divrei Torah, because you got caught for Divrei Torah, for teaching Torah, which is important, right? Like, it sounds like he's accepted Rabbi Akiva's analogy that the Torah is our life, and he's saying, like, you're right, I agree with you, right? Like, we can't just give up our life in order to try and save our lives. And the proof is, because, right, maybe I didn't join your Torah class because I was afraid, but I ended up in jail anyway, right? So I don't know what he got into, like, who knows whether he actually committed a crime or he got accused of a crime falsely, whatever it is, he's saying, you're right, it didn't protect me, right? Leaving the water did not protect me. So, okay. So you have this moment of Rabbi Akiva sort of right, and again, you see Rabbi Akiva's sort of fortitude or strength of purpose where he's not willing to deviate. Right? This is also this story appears in some of the liturgy, so many of us may know it. They took Rabbi Akiva out to be executed, and it was time for recitation of Shema, probably first thing in the morning, right? They're kind of raking his flesh with iron cones, which was actually a thing that was done in the Roman Empire, like, okay, well, they knew. And he was accepting the yoke of the kingdom of heaven, meaning he was reciting Shema, right? The first paragraph of Shema is called Ol Malchut Shamayim, right? Hashem Elokeinu Hashem. Okay. Amrulo Talmidav. So his students said to him, Rabbeinu, Ad Kan, Rabbi, even now, meaning like, okay, like you're about to die. Do you really have to say Shema right now as you're being tortured to death? Amar Lahem, first of all, like there's a few stories where the rabbi who's being executed by the Romans has a conversation with his students during the execution. I don't know if that's supposed to have happened that way, or either that conversation might have happened before, or it's being attributed to him as sort of like, why are we're not telling this story to sort of like revel in the gruesomeness of it. We're telling it to learn a lesson, and this is the lesson. Okay, so his students say to him, he says to them, Kol Yamai Hayiti Mista'er al Pasuk. I used to always wonder about this pasuk. or I was always troubled by, is a better translation, this pasuk, b'chol nafshecha, right? Afilu notel et nafshecha. Interesting, right? B'chol nafshecha, right? V'ahavta et Hashem Elokecha b'chol nafshecha, right? You should love God with all your soul. And there's a midrash about it that says, afilu notel et nishmatcha, right? Even if God takes your life, you should love God. Amarti, matai yavo li'adi v'akavenu. When or how will that come to my hands that I can fulfill it, right? So I think it's ambiguous here whether he means that you can only fulfill this, right? Some people die under circumstances that don't permit them to sort of engage in this last moment of theological reflection. Maybe that's what he's saying, or maybe he's saying I was always wondering when my anxiety about death was tied up together with my anxiety about this mitzvah. I don't know. Right? Now that my time has finally arrived and I have the opportunity because I'm with it enough, or sort of I'm aware that I'm dying and I have the opportunity to fulfill this mitzvah of loving God with all your heart. How could I not? Right? And he was extending the word echad, which is a sort of a practice that has other roots, right? Until his soul leaves with the word echad, right? Yasav bakol ve'amra ashrecha Rabbi Akiva sheyatzani shkacha b'cha, right? And a bakol came out and said, Rabbi Akiva, you are so fortunate that your soul has left with echad. So again, right, first we have confirmation from Papos that you did the right thing, right? Like I challenged you, but you were actually right. And now we have confirmation from heaven that Rabbi Akiva is sort of so saintly that the close of his life reflects his values throughout. Okay? At this moment, Malachei HaSharet said before God, Zu Torah v'zu schara, right? Which we've seen before. Moshe asked the same question, right? This is Torah and this is its reward, right? Mimtim yacha Hashem mitim, right? Like your hand kills and does not save. Like the angels are kind of upset. Amar lahem chalkam b'chayim. And here, instead of saying Shah, not your business, God says their portion is in life, meaning that Rabbi Akiva it's true. In this world, it looks like he has this terrible lot, but he's going to a better place where he actually has sort of a destiny of eternal life. I think this in 1 minute, right? First of all, like I said, I don't know that this answer is always very satisfying to the problem of evil and suffering, which is like, oh, don't worry, in the world to come, it's all going to be straightened out. But this is the answer that Rabbi Akiva gave to Rabbi Eliezer, and this is the answer that's given about him, meaning what you see is his ability to be consistent with what he believes in some way. But the second thing is that, right, this moment, which is Rabbi Akiva's last moment on earth, where he's sort of shocking his students with his religious devotion, it actually carries through what we saw last time and the time before, which is Rabbi Akiva's ability to see things in a different way, right? His students look at the situation and they're like, this is terrible. And he's like, actually, this is the opportunity I've always been waiting for. And right, that ability to both to remain sort of loyal and steadfast to his values, for example, in the case of the washing of hands, right? But at the same time, to constantly be able to reevaluate a circumstance and see it from a perspective that others can't, I think is sort of the defining theme of all of the things we've said about Rabbi Akiva thus far. And maybe I'll give like a little sort of homiletic thing, right? Right? His soul leaves on one, right? Part of that is like he's connected to God in a very sort of unusual way, special to him. But it's also, right, like one of the sort of the unique things about Rabbi Akiva is that he can unify both of those things, right? He can unify sort of loyal to his values without getting stuck in things and always being able to reevaluate. And that's something that in the story of Spira, for example, it's not clear he can pass on to his students who end up dying, or at least his initial students, but, for himself, that's what makes him kind of like a sui generis, unique figure. 201. So I want to thank you all for joining and sticking with me this whole time, and I wish you the best. I saw a little cartoon by my daughter's kindergarten teacher, and it's a picture of a person. I mean, he also is a cartoonist. It's a picture of a person, and it's just like a stick figure, and he's like smiling. He says, "I'm fine. How are you?" And in his head, he's like crying in a corner. So, we all have those moments. And thanks for joining me and having a little break from the strangeness of our world. Thanks for coming.
Thank you so much, Miriam.